Hey Andy,
Hey there, what's going on? Of
not much. Thank you so much for joining PMM Perspectives. I'm excited to chat with you today.
course, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to dive right in. And the first thing I'm going to ask you is just to share a little bit about your background, how you got into product marketing, and how you actually landed in competitive intelligence.
I've been in product marketing a little over 5 years now, and I came from a sales background initially,
Same.
but it
Love
was
it.
just yeah, and it's definitely come in handy in my product marketing world, but I have to say I like it a lot better
Yeah.
than sales, and so I'm very, very grateful to be in product marketing. But yeah, I pretty much, I was in sales for a couple years, and I was like looking for any excuse to get into marketing,
Yeah.
and was kind of just like applying everywhere, and finally got a response from a company called Zoom Info.
Oh, amazing.
This was back like 5-ish years ago, and so
Yeah.
got my first product marketing role there. Was really excited to jump in. I was the second product marketing hire there, and did a little bit of everything. Right, did like the enablement, did the product launches, competitive intel, all that kind of stuff. And as the company grew, and the team grew, then the product marketing team started specializing a bit more. And I personally loved competitive intel, not just because I thought it was interesting, but because I felt like the company as a whole really thought that it was
Yeah.
valuable, and the
Love
leadership
it.
team noticed it. And obviously,
And
when you're
because you have a sales background.
exactly that too.
How important it is. Yeah.
Exactly. And so all those things like led to me just thinking, okay, I want to double down on this. So I owned the competitive program there for a couple years, and then just started sharing a little bit more about it. And then ClickUp reached out, asked me to do the same thing over there. I went over there, and then Apollo reached out, and now I'm doing the same thing over at Apollo. So I'm the compete guy now.
That's so cool. Yeah, I mean, I think competitive is so interesting because things change so quickly, like across tech companies, across different industries. So, what are some of the things that you're doing or that you can suggest people to do to just stay ahead of their competition?
Yeah, I think that having your ICP research backed and locked in, that's like
Yeah.
the number one way to stay ahead of your
Love.
competitors. And that's one thing that really attracted me to both ClickUp and Apollo. When I started to work at both of those companies, they really had a strong understanding of exactly who they were for and who they're not. Because, contrary to what a lot of people might want to think, like, oh, like we're great for everybody, that's unfortunately not the case for a lot of companies and products. You're typically, especially because, all of these categories are so crowded now, you really can do a great job with like a select group of people, but then you kind of have to ignore the people that you're not great for, or that you naturally don't really find your product as useful as maybe some of the other competitors. And so that could be focusing really like on smaller companies. Like that's like what Apollo and ClickUp have really been focusing on. And I think ClickUp is now moving a bit more up market. But in either case, Apollo has really found a sweet spot with like VSMB, SMB agencies, and that's really given us a competitive advantage for compared to some of the other vendors in our space. So I'd say that's one, having that really locked in, and then also just having, and this is going to sound super generic, but having a really great relationship with your users, having that kind of like back and forth to where you can really learn what their pain points are, what they expect from your product. And this
Yep.
again, it kind of ties
Yeah.
back to
Yeah.
having that really great research backed ICP, because when
Yeah.
you have that locked in and you have a great relationship with them, like the sky's the limit. You can innovate really quickly. They'll sing your praises, and you can just, yeah, it's a really great feedback loop essentially.
Totally. I had lunch yesterday with a friend in CMO, and she was telling me that her product marketing team, she met with them recently and they weren't talking to customers. And it was just so interesting because it's so much harder to create, for example, valuable messaging that really resonates if you're not speaking your customer's language or if you don't know your customer's language.
Mm.
And it's the same thing like as you're developing, strong competitive viewpoints, like you want to hear how your users are talking about your tool and also other tools, right?
Yep.
So it makes sense to have that user relationship so that you could influence the roadmap, in a way that's really valuable, but also, be able to create product marketing collateral and updates that actually really speak to that core ICP and user. So
Totally. And it's funny too, because it's funny that you mentioned that, because I do small interviews with CEOs, co-founders of different tech companies for my newsletter. And one that just recently came out was for a company called Capsule, and they do like video editing for companies. And they have a really great like play where they'll host these dinners for their ideal customers, and they use that as an opportunity, number one, to like meet and like to build rapport, that kind of a thing, but also to like really understand and like learn their language. And then they'll take all those conversations and they'll try to like twist that into like their positioning messaging, and so that way again like they're speaking the same language as their ICP, and they're able to resonate better with their customers over time. And again, they're able to like build that rapport. So again, it's like that like feedback loop happening like in real time. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, and it's easier than guessing.
Yeah, 100%.
Easier than just trying to make it up. So
you're like, why is my homepage not converting right now? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Tell me about healthy competition.
Healthy competitions. That's like my side project for competitive intel practitioners. I realized a few years ago, this was when I was still at Zoom Info, that there really weren't many resources for competitive intel practitioners, at least outside of, from vendors who are selling a competitive intel platform kind of a thing. Like there really wasn't anybody talking about how to do well in it. It was kind of like a taboo topic. And I didn't really know why it had to be. And so I just tried to share a little bit more about it, and other competitive intel practitioners started connecting with me. And I thought like, oh, this is really cool. I love like learning like with other folks in my space. And naturally, like it led to us like sharing like our plays, like how we go about things, how we grow in our careers. And so I was like, cool, like let's build out like a community, a newsletter. Of course, that was over the span of a couple of years. It didn't just happen overnight, but it's been a lot of fun to just kind of create content that supports this group and introduce folks to each other to like help them out, not just like within their jobs, like tactically, but also from a career perspective, because it is kind of a funky role. I still get, I actually got a DM today from a PMM who was like, oh, I didn't know that like you could get a job in competitive intel. And I was like, yeah, like you can absolutely do it. And so there's so much education that needs to take place. And I've just found that it's easier to learn from other people who are just naturally inclined to help. They don't really have an agenda. They just like want to see others succeed. And so that's really what healthy competition's all about.
That's awesome. And it's validating, right? Because like you kind of see, are people in my network or my community thinking about this in a similar way that I am?
Absolutely.
Or even like, are people coming up with their own frameworks and ideas as I am? And is that okay?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think, I mean, I could see how competitive could be very isolating, because everybody's like, oh, I don't want to share like my secrets. This is about competition.
Yeah.
And weird. And I don't know what questions to ask. So that's awesome. That's awesome that you're like building this, connective community to actually share ideas.
It's funny. I say new, it's been around for decades, but it's kind of going through a little bit of a reimagining, I would say, like at least in B2B SaaS. And people are doing like really cool things, but there's no real set way to do it within any company. Like there might be a framework for building like your first sales team or build your first marketing hire, like whatever. Like you kind of see these like frameworks and playbooks, all that kind of stuff for different roles and functions within a company. But there's really not much like that for competitive intel. And so it's been really cool to see how people approach it at different companies, what they like, their wins, what they think was going to be a win, but was actually like a miss. Because I've had plenty of both. And so being able to share that and like feel comfortable sharing those things like with a group, it's definitely been a cool thing to see grow.
That's awesome. When you think about 2024, and I mean, it's crazy. Like, what are we, halfway through already?
Yeah. Yeah. What is time?
Sad about that. When you think about 2024, what sort of competitive intelligence trends are coming up, or things that people, in the product marketing space should maybe be aware of or pay attention to?
So I would say for me, what I've seen, I'm going to mention AI, I promise, but it's not going to be the first thing I mention. So the thing that I've noticed is really just like the increased awareness of CI even outside of the realms of PMM. Like I would say that I still roll up under the PMM team and collab with them every single day. But when I first started in CI, most of it was for product launches. Like that was really what I was lending my expertise for, and to help with like differentiated messaging, a lot of like win-loss based around like awareness of other competitors, like branding, that kind of stuff. Now I'm really getting looped in much more on like the product side and like the strategic like leadership side and sales and customer success and support. Like it's really like if you can really like make yourself visible and you can like plug yourself in as the CI lead at a company, like you can really get great understanding of what is going on in the business, and you can really plug yourself in to be a great like input to make things go well, give people a little bit more awareness of how they might be able to like improve things from like a competitive or differentiative perspective. And so that's one thing that I have noticed over the past couple of years is just like how much more awareness there is of the role and how much opportunity there is to actually like make a difference and become more visible. So that's like a personal brand, career kind of growth thing that I've noticed. Now, on like the tactical side, here's what we'll get into some AI and machine learning stuff. I think that like there have been a lot of really cool products that have come out that you really don't have to pay a ton of money for to use to gather competitive intel now. And a lot of that's like data scraping type stuff or web scraping. So tools like Appify, Browse AI, they can essentially help you like scrape information off of social media, off of competitor websites, send you alerts when things are like changing, and super easy to actually like just get those close to free or for like cents on the dollar. It's like very crazy. Whereas I think in the past you'd have to spend like tens of thousands of dollars on stuff like that from tools. So that's one piece. And then there's also this new element of bringing AI into like analyzing just like a ton of customer user feedback on competitive intel. So there's tools like that can help you do that, like with G2 for like user reviews. There's a really cool new tool coming out, or that's out right now, called Alpha Run, that essentially helps you use AI for your win-loss interviews, which has been really cool for me to see, specifically because I'm a huge win-loss fan. And so just the way that companies are like incorporating that and the way that it's really like evangelized across like the SaaS space, I think that it's been really cool to see. And it's been especially helpful like from a budget perspective, because usually, like I said, like CI doesn't usually have a big budget. And so if you're really smart and you're like really trying to like take the initiative and learn like how to get scrappy with some of these AI tools, I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So you have a course ready for launch, right?
Yes.
And that is a collection of repeatable playbooks, it sounds like, for product launches. What are some of your favorite frameworks from there?
Ooh, favorite framework. So my favorite, I can't dive too deeply into like the actual like templates that we share, other than like the high level topics. Like I can say like my specific favorite day, because we break it down to a few days. Like I handle like the competitive intel day and like some of like the messaging and like strategic narrative stuff. But then Tamara Graminsky, she handles a lot of like the pricing. And she has a really great explanation, kind of breakdown of how you can approach pricing, not just from like a competitive perspective, but also from like a marketing perspective. And I think that is it's just like a gaping hole for most marketers. Like I can tell you, whenever I had to deal with pricing related stuff as it related to a launch,
you're like,
in previous years, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
I had no idea. And she really breaks it down in such a way to where you can really understand like how you can start like she shares like different like ways of testing pricing, who you should be looping in, how you can make a specific recommendation, and like really the impact that you can make from great pricing recommendations. So that's
amazing.
one. And then Jason Oakley is the other instructor, and he handles a lot of like the messaging and enablement, like the actual like launch tactics. And he has a great like day of launch schedule that he's implemented. I will totally like be transparent. Like I'm kind of like I'm a last minute kind of guy. Like I just kind of like you know, like fly by the seat of my exactly. Like so I can really appreciate like everything like that you need to do like on a specific day as it relates to a launch, because if anybody's been a part these big like tier 1 launches where you have multiple teams that you're trying to coordinate between, and it's really important that everyone's locked in. Having these kind of like checklists and like, here's why you need to like loop them in, here's why this timing you need to do, like there's so much more detail than just like, ta-da, like we're launched. And so I found that one super, super valuable as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Question for you. When you're thinking about measuring success, which on launch day from a product launch or, after the product launch, what kind of KPIs are you actually looking for that indicate success?
For us, I mean, if we're talking about like a specific product launch, it really can depend on a couple of things. I think we look on like internally, like how ready are folks like on our sales side or like the product side to actually like talk about this launch and deploy it and get new users in. That's kind of like the first like high level side of things that we'll be looking at from like, in like the first week. That as well as like, visibility and on the actual launch itself. And so if we're talking about a new feature, like, okay, how many people are like requesting to see that feature from like the social posts that we're pushing out, or from like the PR that we pushed out, or like from the new landing page that we published. Tracking all those types of things at a high level is really important. But then it's really important also to, and Tamara, my like co-instructor, she is very, very like adamant about the concept of rolling thunder, about how you're not just like pushing out the launch and then moving on to the next thing, even though it's very tempting to do that.
Right.
You really need to have like ongoing metrics to make sure that the launch that you pushed out, like that there's so much life and like juice that you can squeeze from one big launch.
Yeah.
And so having some kind of like way of tracking like ongoing, whether it's, more content that you're publishing, like from like a blog perspective, case studies of people like using your tool like effectively over time, or you are tracking like adoption over like the product over a certain amount of time, and building out like in product like Pendo guides or something like that to like drive people to use it, like adopt it more. Like those are other like key metrics that I've like specifically tried to add to my launches. So hopefully that gives like a good like 360 of what we try to do. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things, but yeah.
Sure. I think it's so helpful to remember, like, you do the product launch and then there's so much that comes after it. It's not like, okay, we're done, like moving on. It's like you really have to like come back to it, see what you can expand upon, see what needs more support, see what you can iterate on. So 100%, I agree.
Yeah. I think that the other key too that I don't think many people talk about, it's this like idea, because we're so like metrics driven and we try to get like as many different like numbers as we can as it relates to a launch, like how well did it do, like all that kind of stuff, which is important, yes. But it's really important to also, same with like win-loss data, you need to have like more qualitative information on your launch from your customer's perspective. This happened yesterday. Like we were talking about like one specific launch that we did, and like a Slack thread, one of our VPs who handles a lot of like the webinars and community stuff, like things, mentioned like, oh yeah, when we presented this feature in this webinar, a lot of people were really lost. Like they didn't really understand like why we were adding it, how they should be using it, and gave like XYZ quotes about it. And that really helped us understand, okay, well, for like the rolling thunder of this launch, like we need to like really try to like lean in on answering like some of these questions so that sticks a little bit better.
I love that.
So I think that's also really important too, is just to like bring in some more of that customer perspective, not just like adoption numbers, but in other ways too.
For sure. Okay. What's your advice for aspiring product marketers?
I think that honestly, I've seen a lot of people go from other departments into product marketing by just like helping out product marketers and being like that. Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like that squeaky wheel, like in that other, because again, product marketing is such a cross-functional role. There's like we always need help from sales, customer success, product, in so many different ways. And I've found that also it's much easier to hire internally from a product marketing perspective. That's me personally. I think that's easier. People know the product, they know the customers. Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, of course there are times like where you might want to like hire a product marketing leader, like whatever. But the fact that for me, like if it's like, a product marketing manager, entry level, whatever, it's typically for me, I like the idea of hiring internally. And so if you can prove yourself as being somebody who is like reliable, who understands like the importance of product marketing, and like you offer to like maybe be like
Be
a part of a
partner.
tiger team, that's going to set you apart from a lot of other candidates right away. And so that would be like my first recommendation. Other than that, it's kind of a funky role. I don't know if I have any specific advice because I've never been in like another marketing role. I literally went from sales into product marketing. But I can say, like, if you are in sales or any kind of customer facing role, you will probably have a really like an easier time getting in than anybody else, unless there's a big unless you've spent time in the industry that a company hiring for a product marketer is, because that's another, like, you need to find some kind of like wedge where like I don't have experience as a product marketer, but you need to understand like this industry or this ICP. That's me. I can help you do that, and I'll like come in as like an entry level, like, so that's the other way that you can try to approach that, because that's really important from a product marketing perspective.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, when I got into product marketing, I had been selling for 10 years. I had no idea how I was ever going to get out of sales. Like, I was like, I'm doomed. Like, this is like going to be my whole life.
This is my life, yep.
And actually, it's interesting. When I finally got into it, I met Ray, our co-founder, at a PMM conference. And I said to her in one of her workshops, I'm new to product marketing. We were doing a messaging and positioning course that she was leading. And she's like, oh, what did you do before? And I said, I've been, selling in B2B SaaS for, I think it was like 7 years or something. And then I sold before that in other areas for 3. And she's like, well, then you're not new to product marketing.
Yeah.
Because it's really like you're talking to customers about products, and it's like, I think from my experience, it's actually been so, so helpful, to your point earlier in the conversation, to bring in that perspective. Because I feel like a lot of times salespeople don't always trust or collaborate well with marketing teams because there's a disconnect on what's important, But I think with the sales background, and also when you're in a product marketing role, you really like see how everything ties together. Like, you're really helping to serve sales and obviously working with product as well.
Yeah, I think that's a big key that I see a lot of PMMs unfortunately missing. It's just like that when it comes to that relationship with sales. It's that almost like lacking understanding or like lacking empathy of like what it really is like to be a seller. Because I think that you're right, they understand product marketing, but they're doing it on hard mode. Like if they try like a specific type of like talk track or like messaging, right? Because that's really what a talk track is at the end of the day. They could get completely like, dismissed in a call, and a product marketer who's never like spoken to a customer can be like, oh, just like use this messaging. They're like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Like, I know customers talk.
Exactly. Sure. And so that's very, very important. That's a great point.
Okay, final fun question. What are some of your other areas of passion?
Ooh, I'm a big music guy.
Totally music guy.
Yeah, I've got like the band tee on. I got my drum kit there in the back. Yeah. So I've been a drummer for well over, how many years now? 15-ish years. And so played in a few bands. It's definitely like my creative outlet. And if I find that if I'm not playing music for too long of a period of time, then I get really bummed out when I when I haven't been like playing for a really long time, because it's like one of those activities where you can't be thinking about work like while you're playing. You know what I mean? Like I can't be thinking about like a product launch or anything like that. And so it's very much like I can kind of get out of my own head and just like
present.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation. Thanks for being on PMM Perspectives. And this is awesome.
Thanks so much for having me.